We are talking about one of the most interesting chapter, that is human skeleton and locomotion. We have to understand certain technical terms before starting with the actual chapter. The very first word that I want to discuss is something called as movement. When I use this word movement, so logically what is movement? I can say movement is nothing but it is a change in posture or position. Change in posture or position basically is termed as movement. Now this movement basically is seen in both the unicellular and multicellular organism. It is seen in both unicellular and multicellular organism. All the organisms which are unicellular and multicellular, they will show movement and they are going to show locomotion. We are talking about human skeleton and locomotion. First word that we need to understand, the word is very much clear and easily understood, that is called as movement. Logically, what is movement? It is nothing but it is change in posture or position. It is seen in both unicellular as well as multicellular organism. When I talk about unicellular organism, so the animal that comes in my mind is amoeba. Amoeba is going to show movement and it shows by the help of pseudopodia. So pseudopodia becomes one of the most important organ for, it's not an organ basically, it is a cytoplasmic projection that is helping in movement. The second word that comes in my mind is locomotion. See, there is a very fine difference between these two words, the movement and locomotion. When I use this word locomotion, basically locomotion is nothing but it is movement that result in change of place or location. That is called as locomotion. Movement that results in change of place or location. So when you are doing movement and if there is a change in the place or location, it is called as locomotion. The point here is, when I say this word locomotion and movement, what is the basic difference? So in order to understand this, let's check it in this way. I draw one boy, and if this boy is standing normally, so let us take his standing in this way, and suddenly this boy raises his one hand. So if he is raising his one hand, this can be considered as movement. This is not considered as locomotion because he is just raising his hand. But this boy, if he moves from position A to position B, then I can say that this boy is showing something called as locomotion. So movement is nothing but change of posture at a particular place. The body is not getting displaced from one place to the another, then it is called as movement. But when I talk about locomotion, it results in change of place or location. The next question that comes in my mind is why? Why movement is required? Why we move from one place to the another? So the answer to this question for why will be in this way. When I say movement, see, it's like a bike. If you keep the bike standing still, it will not stand unless and until you put it on stand, it will fall. But when the bike is in motion, it never falls. Why? Because movement is responsible for two important words. The very first word is called as equilibrium. Movement results in equilibrium. And second word, movement also helps in locomotion. So this is the reason why movement is required. The next part is how many types of movement can we study? So normally we see there are two types of movement. One is internal, that is in your body, and second type of movement that we study is external. So external movement and the internal movement. The point here is, what do you mean by this internal movement? What exactly internal movement means? Internal movement involves esophagus. We all know that our esophagus shows a very important movement that is called as peristalsis, the food that moves by contraction and relaxation. So peristalsis is the internal movement. Second, we have heart. Heart basically beats. So the beating of the heart is also a kind of movement, that is internal movement. Then lungs. Whenever we inhale, we exhale, the lungs expands and contract. So that is all a type of internal movement. But when I talk about external movement, so in external movement, we have only two options, our hands and legs. Our hands and legs, they help in external movement. The external movement basically, this external movement is going to result in locomotion. Internal movement will never result in locomotion. External movement results in locomotion. Let's understand the different types of movement, because whenever we talk about movement, we have to remember the types of movement. So with respect to unicellular or multicellular, there are three different types of movement. The very first type of movement is amoeboid movement. When I use this word amoeboid movement, it is like movement like amoeba, that is amoeboid movement. Second movement that we have is called as ciliary movement. We all know cilia, that is small hair like structure. So when movement is involved by the help of cilia, it is ciliary movement. The third type basically is the muscular movement. So whenever it comes to movement, remember there are three types of movement: amoeboid movement, ciliary movement, and muscular movement. So let's talk about this. When I say amoeboid movement is seen with the help of pseudopodia. So the amoeba is the most important organism. Then even our WBCs, the white blood corpuscles, they don't have a fixed shape, no regular shape as such. They also will show amoeboid movement so that they can travel through blood capillaries and squeeze out. When I say ciliary movement is going to focus on cilia. What are cilia? Small hair-like structures. Now, where are cilia present? First of all, cilia is present in respiratory tract. Your trachea is lined by cilia that helps in the movement of the particles out from the respiratory tract. Then cilia is also seen in case of renal tubule. We all know about PCT, nephron. You will get renal tubule, you will get cilia in the renal tubule also. So ciliary movement, even when there is a movement of egg taking place, the ova, so the fallopian tube of the female reproductive system, it consists of cilia. So these are different movements with respect to cilia. When I say muscular movement, so muscular movement is basically concerned with the movement of your hands, movement of your legs, and even your jaw. You speak because there is a muscular movement going on. And most important, all these muscular movements, they contract and they relaxes. So these are the different types of movement that we normally study. The point here is next important word, that is called as locomotion. When I use this word locomotion, logically what do you mean by this locomotion? The definition that I gave you was change in position of any animal from one place to the another is locomotion. So in short, I can say movement from one place to another. Movement from one place to another is called as locomotion. The second one, for example, Hydra, it moves. Now the point is, do Hydra really locomote? The answer is yes. They show somersaulting and looping movement. Okay. Hydra moves by the help of their tentacles. So they have tentacles that helps them in movement. Even the paramecium, if the paramecium is able to move from one place to the another, so the paramecium is basically surrounded by lots of cilia. Cilia helps in the movement. Why they have tentacles and cilia? So the most important answer is to trap food particles. So in order to trap food particles, Hydra has tentacles and the paramecium basically has cilia. I can put one very important and interesting statement. The statement is all movement are not locomotion. All movement are not locomotion, but all locomotion are movement. When you think over it, you will understand that this statement holds true. That locomotions, all movement are not locomotion, but all locomotions are movement. Now the question comes here. Next is why. Why means why locomotion is required. Why any animal has to move from one place to the another. Forget animal. The question is why we move from one place to the another. So this becomes our next question. Why locomotion is required. So very first reason I can say locomotion is required for searching food. We cannot prepare our own food like animals. We cannot prepare our own food like plants. So we need to move from one place to the another in search of food. This is the first reason. Second reason, we always do locomotion to get proper shelter. We migrate from one place to the other under unfavorable condition. It is purely because of locomotion. Then the next reason is finding mate, because the ultimate goal of each and every living organism on this earth is to reproduce, continue the race, even migration. These are the various reasons why we move. Even locomotion helps us in certain activities like swimming. It even helps us in hopping. It helps us in running. Even I can say creeping, or even I can say jumping. These are all different activities that is possible only because of locomotion. If we are not able to locomote, we cannot show such kind of activities. So remember, locomotion is the most important part for any animal on this earth. If that animal is not able to locomote from one place to the another, it means that animal will die under unfavorable conditions. Let's talk about very important and interesting part that is called as bones. Now the moment I use this word bones, it is connecting me to only one word that is called as skeleton. So when I use this word bone, it is connecting me with skeleton. All the animals that are available on this earth, they have only two type of skeleton. Very first type of skeleton is called as endoskeleton. The other type of skeleton that we see is exoskeleton. Endoskeleton means something that is present inside the body. So in endoskeleton, I can put bones plus cartilages. The bone and cartilages becomes the endoskeleton. When I talk about exoskeleton, it is crustaceans, the crabs, the spiders, the scorpions. They show exoskeleton. Humans, they will have both. So I can say that humans have both endoskeleton as well as the exoskeleton. What is endoskeleton in human? So we have the bones and the cartilage. What is the exoskeleton? So I can say the nail that is present is going to act as your exoskeleton. What is the role of this bone? Or if I ask you what is the function of this skeleton, somebody says, please tell me the function of the bones. What are the different roles that bone is going to play in your body? So very first thing I will say that the bones, they are going to support me. Second, they are going to provide me protection. Even the all internal organs, they are protected because of this skeleton. And most important, it gives me a framework, a shape to my body. Imagine your body without bone, it will be like a mud, nothing else, just slime basically. And at the same time, it gives shape to body. So this becomes a very important role of the bones. And bone plays a very important role in movement and locomotion. That is why bone is very important part of our body, skeletal system. Let's check it in this way now. There are three different things that I need to confirm you. So what I will be doing now, I will be drawing one bone. Let me draw a bone for you. So this is a general, normal, simple bone. There is one more bone here like this, which is holding the other bone. So I take it here in this way. So this is the bone which is holding the above bone. So let's put it in this way. This is also a bone. This is also a bone. And the point where the two bones are meeting, basically, let me give some color to it. This part, basically, this area. So this area I can call it as a joint. The two bones where they meet, basically is called a joint. So what is joint? Nothing but the place where two or more bones they meet. Basically what happens here, your bone is not free, it has muscles. So I take it in this way now. This is the muscle that is present on the bone. Let's take this to be your bicep tricep muscles in this way. So this is a muscle. So I draw this. Now what I will say that this is the muscle, this is the bone. So here, and this is the joint. Most important word that you need to understand in any kind of movement or locomotion, the bone is going to act as a lever. Remember this, the bone is going to act as a lever, the joint is going to act as a fulcrum, and the muscle is responsible for generating force. So if any energy is generated, it is purely because of this. So for any joint, remember, bone is going to act as a lever, joint is going to act as a fulcrum, and muscle is going to provide the force. This is very important point for your NEET exam also. Let's talk about human skeleton. Now by this we have understood this all important parts. Let's talk about the human skeleton. When I say human skeleton, our skeleton is having 206 bones. I will just show the bifurcation. So human skeleton has how many bones? We can say 206 bones are present in our body. So if I draw a simple logical diagram just to make you understand how things are working. So I take this as the skull, then I take this as the basically the vertebral bone which is behind. Okay, and here I take the girdle, basically where your legs will be placed on this side, and for, let us take this to be the ribs area. So I take it as the ribs area. So let's take this to be the ribs area. Here I take one more basically girdle like this, where you have the collar bone and all other bones present. This becomes your leg. So I'm not drawing all the bones of the leg, but just to make you understand how your 206 bones are divided. This becomes your leg and this becomes your hand bone. So when I draw this, this will help me to understand the different number of bones that are present in my body. So as far as the skull is concerned, remember skull has 29 bones. When we talk about this black color one, it was vertebral column. So skull, remember it is 29 bones. This is vertebral column. So vertebral column has 26 bones. This is your rib cage. The green color one is nothing but rib cage. Rib cage has all total 25 bones. This is your hand bone. So logically hand bone consists of 30 bones. In the legs also there are total 30 bones. This is girdle. The above is called as pectoral girdle, and there are 4 bones in the pectoral girdle, and the lower one is called as pelvic girdle. So there are 2 bones in the pelvic girdle. So if you remember the actual numbering, it becomes very easy. The skull is 29, then the rib cage is 25, vertebral column is 26, your hand is 30, so 30 and 30 becomes 60, your leg is 30, so 30 and 30 becomes 60. So all total 120 bones are present in your hands and legs. Pectoral girdle will be 4. Why 4? 2 this side, 2 right side, 2 left side. Pelvic girdle will be 2. So 1 and 2 compared. This is how your 206 bones are placed. Now let us understand how these 206 bones are divided, basically how they are present. So in order to understand this 206 bones, I put it in this way. Human skeleton, I divide it into 2 major parts. The very first part will be axial skeleton. When I use this word axial skeleton, means the skeleton which is present on the axis, and second one is the appendicular skeleton. So appendicular skeleton means it will include all the appendages. So for axial skeleton, there are total, for axial skeleton, there are total 80 bones. For appendicular skeleton, there are total 126 bones. So axial and appendicular 80 and 126. Let's talk about this 80 axial. So this 80 axial is further divided into, very first, that will be your skull. Then after skull, we are going to have vertebral column. After vertebral column, we are going to have the thoracic cage, or even if you want, you can call it as rib cage. So how this 80 is bifurcated? So remember, skull is going to have 29 bones. Your vertebral column has 26 bones, and your rib cage is going to have 25 bones. We have to study all this in detail. When I talk about appendicular skeleton, this appendicular skeleton is divided basically into two parts. One will be your appendages. Appendages means your hand bone and the leg bone. So I just put it as limb bone. So limb bone here, and the two other one is called as girdles. So when it comes to limb bone, how many bones are there? I can say 120. 30 in your hand, so 30, 30, 60. 30 in your legs, 30, 30, 60, so 120. Girdles, total there will be 6. And there are two girdles basically. So when I say limb bone, let us take hand and leg. So in hand there will be total 60, and in leg there will be total 60. But when I talk about girdles, there are two basically. One is called as a pectoral girdle, another one is pelvic. So when I use this word pectoral girdle, in pectoral there will be 4, because 2 into 2, 2 right side, 2 left side, and pelvic there will be 1 into 2. So like that you will get your all 100 and 206 bones. So this is the human skeleton, and we have to study all your 206 bones, how they are placed. So let us take it in this way. All the parts of the bone that falls on the axis, they are called as axial skeleton. For example, this part becomes your skull. This part becomes your hand bone. This is your leg bone. This is the lowermost girdle, so it is called as pelvic girdle. The upper one that you can see here, this girdle is called as pectoral girdle. This rib cage, so logically this is nothing but the rib cage. So this becomes your the bone. This is a spine here that you can see the vertebral bone. So this part is called as vertebral bone. Again, if I have to give the numbering, how will I give? I will say skull is 29. Pectoral girdle, you can see one this side and second one this side. So there is 2. So that becomes 4. Rib cage, this is middle one. So it is 25 basically. Your hand bone, when you calculate, it is 30. So 30 on one hand, 30 on another hand. Then your leg bone is also 30. So I can say 30 in one hand, 30 in another hand. Your leg bone also will have 30 and 30. Pectoral girdle basically. So we have 2 here. So I can say this is 1 and this is 1. So like that, when you count, it becomes 2. This is also 2 and 2. So this is vertebral bone here, which is having 26 bones. So this is how you can put all your 206 bones together. Now we have to study the different parts of the bone that is present basically in the skull. So let's start with the axial skeleton. And in the axial skeleton, there are total basically 280 bones basically. And now we have to study all those 80 bones of the axial skeleton. So let us first focus on the skull. When I say skull, basically the skull is divided into 2 major parts. So your 29 bones basically is divided into 2 major parts. First part that is visible, basically I can say it is the part where your brain is present. So it is called as cranial bone, because cranium is nothing but it is the house of your brain. How many cranial bones are there? I will say 8 in number. The second one is called as facial bone. So facial bone is nothing but it is total 14 in number. So whenever it comes to skull, remember it is divided into two parts. One is the cranial bone, and another one is considered as the facial bone. Facial bones means that bone on the face. What are the different cranial bones? Very first, we have frontal lobe. So I can say frontal. Second, we have parietal. So we have frontal, parietal, we have occipital, then we have temporal. So these are the different bones: frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. Then we have something called a sphenoid. After sphenoid there will be ethmoid. So these are the different bones of cranial bones basically. So how many frontal bones? We say 1. How many parietal bone? We say 2. Occipital bone 1, temporal bone 2, sphenoid 1, and ethmoid 1. So when you calculate, it will come to 8. So that becomes your cranial bones. When I say facial bones are divided into two. One that is visible on surface. You can see on your face also. So it is visible on surface. That is called as the facial bone. Another one that is not visible on surface. It means you have to open your skull to see that. So it is not visible on surface. When I say visible on surface, so which are the different? Visible on surface, out of 14, 7 will be visible and 7 will be not visible. So the one which are visible, basically, first is maxilla. Maxilla is nothing but it's your upper jaw. Second is mandible. Mandible is your upper jaw. Then we have nasal bone. Nasal bone is basically your nose. And we have zygomatic bone. Zygomatic is your cheekbone. If you touch your cheek and you can feel a bone, then it is zygomatic bone. So these are all visible bones. How many maxilla? So we have 2, because on the upper lip you can see one depression. That depression indicates that there are 2 parts of maxilla. How many mandible? 1, nasal bone 2, zygomatic bone 2. So these are all visible on the surface. And the one which are not visible on the surface, they are, first is palatine. Now when I use this word palatine, it logically means your tongue, when you try to touch the roof of the mouth part with the tongue, that is palate. So it is palatine. We have lacrimal. It is present in your eye, the socket basically. Then we have vomer bone. Then we have nasal conchia. So these are all not visible on the surface. They are visible only when you open up the skull to see all those bones. So how many palatine are there? Definitely 2 palatine, lacrimal 2, vomer 1, and nasal conchia 2. If you calculate this all, it will not lead to 29 skull bone. So what is left out? We have something called as hyoid bone. Hyoid bone, that is 1 in number. And we have ear ossicles. When I use this word ear ossicles, it means the bones that are present in your ear. How many? Total 6. That is 3 into 2, because you have 2 ear. So each ear there will be 3. Which are the 3 bones? So I can say it is malleus, incus, and stapes. And among all these, malleus, incus, and stapes, remember that this stapes is the smallest bone of your body. So now when you calculate, you will get easily skull bone 29, 8 bone cranial, 14 bone facial, 1 hyoid, and 6 ear ossicles. So this becomes your skull bone, which is having total 29 bones. Now the point is how to remember these name of the skull bones. So for this I give you one shortcut that will help you to remember the name of the skull bones. So for skull, how you will remember the name? The shortcut is pest of 6. That is 1. And this is for skull bone. And when I talk about facial bone, you will remember Viru cannot make my pet zebra laugh. So just remember these two sentences. Viru cannot make my pet zebra laugh as one for facial, and for skull you have to remember pest of 6. So what I can say, pest of 6, P stands for parietal bone, E stands for ethmoid bone, S stands for sphenoid bone, T stands for temporal bone, O stands for occipital bone, and the F basically stands for frontal bone. So if you remember this pest of 6, you will never forget the names of the bone. It is parietal, ethmoid, sphenoid, temporal, occipital. How many parietal? 2, ethmoid 1, sphenoid 1, temporal 2, occipital 1, frontal 1. When we talk about facial bones, so in facial bones what we have? We have viru. Viru basically stands for vomer. Cannot, so it is basically conchia, the nasal conchia. Not stands for nasal bone. Cannot. Make is for maxilla. My is for a mandible. Pet is for palatine. Zebra is for zygomatic. And laugh is for lacrimal. So if you remember this sentence, Viru cannot make my pet zebra laugh, you can easily remember. How many voma? So we say vomer is basically 1. How many conchia? We say 2. How many nasal bone? Basically we say 2. How many maxilla? We say 2. How many mandible? 1. Palatine basically will be 2. Zygomatic 2 and lacrimal 2. And Viru cannot make my pet zebra laugh. Now this boy who is saying Viru cannot make my pet zebra laugh, he is complaining to whom? So he is complaining to basically Miss. So I say hi Miss. So when I say hi Miss, hi stands for hyoid bone. Miss is all the 3-ear ossicles. So we have malleus, we have incus, and we have stapes. So remember this 2 sentence. Viru cannot make my pet zebra laugh. So Viru stands for vomer, can stands for conchia, not is for nasal, make is for maxilla, my is for basically mandible, pet stands for palatine, zebra stands for zygomatic, laugh stands for lacrimal, high is for hyoid, and miss is for malleus incus stapes. For skull, remember this pest of 6, where P stands for palatine, E stands for ethmoid, S stands for sphenoid, T is for temporal, O for occipital, and F for frontal. So like this you can remember all the bones of skull. So this is what you can see in the skull. This diagram that you're seeing is nothing but it is lateral view of the skull. And what you can observe here, basically it is the anterior view of skull. Let's do the labeling of different parts of skull. So different bones that are there. So this is the very first bone, that is called as a frontal bone. So you have a frontal lobe here. This is called as parietal bone. So I call it as parietal bone. Frontal parietal. This is the back portion. So it is called as occipital. So we have frontal bone, parietal bone, occipital bone. This is the side one basically. So this is called as temporal bone. We have frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal bone. Here we have this bone that is called as nasal bone. We have frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, and nasal. This bone that you can observe here, it is called as sphenoid bone. It is called as sphenoid bone. Here we have just behind the eye, this bone that you can see here, the pink color one, this is called as ethmoid bone. So we have frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal, sphenoid, and ethmoid. This is your nasal bone, so I call it as a nasal bone. This is the cheekbone, so the cheekbone I call it as zygomatic bone. This is zygomatic bone. Here the upper jaw that you observe is called as maxilla. The lower jaw that you can see is called as mandible. And there is a process that is going to connect your both the jaws, that is called as mastoid process. I call it as mastoid process. So this is the lateral view of all the bones. Now when I talk about the anterior view, so this part, the biggest one that you can see, is nothing but it is your frontal bone. So I write it as FB, that is frontal bone. Surrounding this, what you can see is the parietal bone, so I write as PB. Here the depression that you can see is the sphenoid bone, I write as SB. Here near the eye that you can see is the ethmoid bone. This part what you can see is nothing but it is the nasal bone. The upper one is called as maxilla. This lower one basically is called as mandible. This is vomer bone which is present here behind. So this line that you can see inside is nothing but it is the vomer bone. It is present inside. This bone is a cheekbone that is called as zygomatic bone. So like this you can remember all different parts of the skull, and remember the two important statement, best of six and Viru cannot make my pet zebra laugh. The next that we have is hyoid bone. So let's understand the structure of the hyoid bone. The hyoid bone basically consists of horns. So we have greater cornua, we have lesser cornua. All these are the parts of the hyoid bone. Malleus, incus and stapes are the three, you can say, ear bone. The smallest bone of your body is stapes. Let's talk about the next important part that is called as vertebral column. When I say vertebral column, this becomes very interesting part. Logically, when we were young, we were having 33 vertebral bones. But later on, when we become adult, they all fuse together to form 26. So let us take, we have cervical. The cervical vertebrae is 7. Then we have thoracic. The thoracic vertebrae is 12. Then we have lumbar. Lumbar vertebrae will be 5. Then we have sacrum or sacral. Sacral is 5, but they all fuse to form 1. And we have the last one that is called as coccyx. Coccyx is nothing but tailbone. It is initially 4, but after that it fuses to form 1. So when you calculate, you get 26 and 33. The after vertebral column, we have something called as thoracic cage. So when I say thoracic cage, it can be also called as your rib cage. Your rib cage is the most important part because it is going to give protection to your heart, to your lungs. So in case of thoracic cage or the rib cage, there are two major bones. The very first that I will put, it is called as sternum. Sternum is in the center, so I take it as sternum. Sternum is always 1. And we have ribs. Total there are 24 ribs, 12 on each side. The sternum is further divided into 3 parts. So I can put it in this way. Sternum is divided into, we have manubrium, we have body, and then we have xiphoid process. We have manubrium, we have body, we have xiphoid process. The ribs 24, so 12 into 12. So how the 12 is arranged? So I can say 1 to 7 ribs, they are called as true ribs, very important. Then 8 to 10, they are called as false ribs. And finally 11 and 12, they are called as floating ribs. Now the point here is, Why 1 to 7 they are called as true ribs? The reason is very much simple. They are directly attached to the sternum. That is why they are called as true ribs. And 8 to 10 is not attached directly. That's why they are called as false ribs. They are attached indirectly via the 7th rib. And the 11th and 12th rib, they are called as floating ribs because they are not attached to the sternum at all. So let us take a diagram of vertebral column. So this diagram that you can see is the diagram of our vertebral column. If you take a look at it very carefully, it is not straight. The vertebral column shows S-shaped curve. So logically there are two curves present here. The very first is near the neck region. See, this is 7 cervical vertebrae. 7 cervical vertebrae is present in the neck region. Whether giraffe or lion or goat or mouse, all will have only 7 cervical vertebrae. This is 12 thoracic vertebrae that is present in our ribs area. This is the lower area basically, that is the lumbar. Sacrum and coccyx is the back portion. It is near the end. This coccyx is also called as tailbone. And since there is a tailbone present, it indicates that our ancestors used to have tail. The 7 vertebral bones, the 7 basically is cervical. So for 7, you need to understand that the first vertebrae that you can see is called as atlas. Atlas is the first cervical vertebrae, and second vertebrae that we can see is nothing but the axis. So remember, atlas and axis are the first and second vertebrae of the cervical. So here thoracic vertebrae, which is thoracic curve, which is primary. So here remember, it has 12 ribs, they will come and meet here. So the first to 7 ribs basically will arise, that will be called as true ribs basically. Then 8 to 10 they will be attached via 7, so they are called as false, whereas 11 and 12 they are called as floating. So we have true ribs, we have false, and we have floating. All the bones basically, the vertebral bones, if I draw this as the vertebral bone, let us take this to be one and this to be the another. So between these vertebral bones there are basically disc present. So this is the disc, which is very important disc that will not allow the two bones to touch each other. So this disc that you can see, what they are called as? They are called as intervertebral disc. We have the lumbar curve, then we have the sacrum. So when I talk about sacrum, remember there are total 5, but 5 fuses to form 1. So since it fuses to form 1, it is called as syn-sacrum. Syn means fused. And finally we have coccyx, the tailbone. So there are 4 bones present. They are fused or fuses to form 1. So this is vertebral column having S-shaped curve. Now there are 2 curves present. Very first curve is called as cervical curve, and this cervical curve is near the neck area, and second curve is the lumbar curve. So remember, our bone basically as vertebral column is not at all straight. It shows S-shaped curve. So we are having this thoracic cage. This first part basically you can see as sternum. Sternum is the first part. So where I draw this as a tie-shaped structure, so I draw this as the first part of the sternum, and then finally we have this. So sternum is divided into 3 parts. So all what you can see here is the sternum. This upper part basically is called as manubrium. The lower part is called as body, and the lowermost is called as xiphoid process. So this becomes the first part of the rib cage. Then there are ribs which are going to come and attach. So if you look at the ribs, it is very easily understood that there are total 12 pairs of ribs. So look at this number wise. If I highlight it, the first one basically, look at this, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. They all are attached directly to the sternum. They all are attached directly to the sternum. But when I look at this eighth one, eighth is not attached directly. See, 8, 9, and 10, they are taking support of seventh and then they are attached to the sternum. So that's why it is called as false rib. Look at 11th and 12th ribs. 11th and 12th, they are not attached only. They are not attached to the sternum at all. And that's why they are called as floating ribs. So whenever it comes to rib, there is 1 to 7 true ribs, 8, 9, 10 false rib, 11 and 12 is the floating rib. When you look at this sternum, there is a notch here present. This notch is called as jugular's notch. So this is the thoracic cage. Seventh, above this, there will be different parts of the vertebral bone. So you can see behind, these are all vertebral bone. The next part that we need to understand is, in general, how the vertebral bone looks alike. So let us see the basic plan of the vertebral bone. So we are going to talk about the basic plan of vertebral bone. Means a typical vertebrae. I will draw a very simple diagram to understand the basic plan for vertebra. So to this, we will first take one oval shaped body. Now this oval shaped body is nothing but it is considered as the centrum. So this what I can draw here, this yellow colored portion that you can see here. This is nothing but the centrum. Centrum means it is the main part. Centrum is the main part of any vertebral bone. So first we will call it as centrum. And this centrum is nothing but it is regarded as the body of vertebral bone. Above this, we are going to have a curve. So let me draw that for you so that things becomes easy for you to understand. So I draw this as first one, then I draw this as the second one. So there is a curve present here. These curves have their own meaning here. Okay. So what is there in the center? So here in the center, you can see a space here. So this space that you can see in the center here, it is called as vertebral foramen. It is called as vertebral foramen, and this vertebral foramen is actually the space that will allow the passage of neural, you can say spinal cord, therefore it is also called as neural canal. So vertebral foramen, which is also called as neural canal, that will allow the passage of the spinal cord. Every vertebral bone is going to have a process like this. This is the first process. Then we have this extension, or if we want, we can draw it a bit better. So I take this as the extensions. This becomes the extension. There are some facets present here. So I take this as the facet on one side. This facet is for other vertebral bone to sit on it. So this becomes the another facet. Now let's do the labeling. So what you can see here, basically, if I make it a bit short, it's quite big, so I take it in this way. This becomes the lamina. This is called as lamina. The lower portion is called as pedicel. The lamina and the pedicel together, they are called as neural arch. We have this process. This process is called as spinous process. And the spinous process is basically resulting in the spine. This what you can see here, it is called as transverse process, that will allow all the nerves to pass through it. So this is how your posterior view of the any typical vertebrae looks alike. So this is called as posterior view. Let us take a look at the anterior view also, because lateral, not posterior, anterior view. Let's look at the lateral view. So let's talk about the lateral view. So when I talk about the lateral view, how exactly it will appear? So lateral view, let's check it in this way. Now this is the side view that we are observing here. Let us take here in this way. This becomes the lower portion, and this is the lower part. So I take it like this. Then I draw the body here. Then I take another extension here, something like this. Then I draw the process, spinous process that we have seen. There will be two articulating process. One is called as superior articulating process above, and another one is called as inferior articulating process. So these are all different processes that we need to study, and we draw one transverse process. So how to do the labeling? This is the side view basically. So here what you can see is the pedicel. This part that you can see is the floor, that is called as lamina. Here this is upper one, so it is called as superior articulating process. So it is called as superior articulating process. And the one which is downward, it is called as inferior. So this is called as inferior articulating process. Then we take out the next one. This is spinous process. This is general structure where all the 26 vertebrae will show these structures. This part, what you can see here, this part is nothing but the centrum. So centrum is nothing but, it is regarded as the body of any vertebral bone. So this all becomes the basic plan of the vertebral bone.